الله أكبر الله أكبر.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا واكرمنا ولا تهنا واعطنا ولا تحرمنا واثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وارض عنا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Seek His assistance, His guidance and forgiveness. And we take refuge with Him from the evil within our souls and from the consequence of our misdeeds. Whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives guidance to, none can mislead, and whoever He misleads, none can guide. I bear witness that there's nothing and no one worship. I bear witness that there's nothing and no one worthy of worship besides Allah alone. He has no partners. And I bear witness that Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, is a slave and messenger. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant him peace and to extend him our salutations on this blessed day. And it says we ask him to grant peace to his family members, his companions, and all those who follow in goodness and goodwill to the meeting and the reckoning with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If one were to watch the news or read the newspaper, that some of the headlines would be connected with certain countries, certain powers. We open the news and we find that there's a belief, or at least some proof, that the Russians have begun to invade the Ukraine. In the news, we find reports of a group in the Muslim world calling itself the Islamic State, and also talk of the Western powers planning to punish that group. We find in the news reports that Saudi Arabia and Qatar, among other countries, have been bombing parts of Libya. We find in the news talk of Gaza and a ceasefire with the Israelis and the Palestinians. We find in the news talk of political unrest in Pakistan, among other things. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He reminds us that the chaos that is caused or does exist in this world is because of what we have done. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِي النَّاسِ ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِي النَّاسِ لِيُذِيقَهُمْ بَعْضَ الَّذِي عَمِلُوا لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. Corruption has spread in land and sea because of what the hands of men have acquired or have earned. It has spread in order that we give them to taste a part of what they have done, in hopes that they shall return. In hopes that they shall return. This is what the Quran teaches us. That when we look at the corruption, we look at murder, we look at rape, we look at enslavement, we look at economic and other injustices, that it's because of us. It's because of what people have earned, what men have earned. And this is something which is repeated all throughout the Quran, that what we earn is what leads to our state. That is to say that if our appetites and our anxieties and our ambitions go unchecked, that we don't try to suppress and to control those appetites and those ambitions and those anxieties, and this is what it will lead us to. That if we are obsessed with building and building and building, and we cut down all the trees, and naturally the ozone layer will be affected. The level of our own air itself, which we breathe, will be affected. If we continue to dump things in the sea, then the water that we drink will be affected. The life in that part of the world will be affected, among other things, as we all know. But the reason why I began by speaking about what's in the news and whose news we are watching is to remind us of the very fact that reality as we know it often is nothing more than a social construct. That is to say that human activity in many different levels, in many different regards, is what constructs for the human being what his or her perception of reality is. And that is to say, for instance, that when we look at the news, in particular in we call it Western countries, and then we've asked the question, why do we call them Western countries? That Muslims erroneously think that the reason that we call this the West is because the Muslim world is in the East, when in fact the West is called the West in contradistinction to Eastern Europe, not in contradistinction to the Middle East. Right? There was at one time the Roman Empire. There was the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire, right? And there was the Eastern Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, and then there was the Western Roman Catholic Church. So that's where the West comes from. There was always a type of friction between the East and the West in the European tradition. That we say the West, we adopt terms that have been given to us. Our own self-definitions often have been given to us, influenced by the structures under which we live. But the great economic powers are those who have the greatest influence on our understanding of reality. And it should be no surprise that the Prophet ﷺ, one of the prayers that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him to make in the Quran is قُرْ وَقُرْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا, Lord, increase me in knowledge. It is the only thing in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders the Prophet to pray for an increase in knowledge. And the word ilm for knowledge is not simply when we think of scientific. We're not talking about necessarily scientific knowledge. Of course, it means for the Prophet, first and foremost, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase him in his understanding of his Creator, to increase him in his understanding of those things that will bring him closer to Creator and help him to become more human, become more that person, that exemplar that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants them to become. But also it is a dua, it is a prayer for us asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us to see reality as it really is. And this is why many of the scholars, they define knowledge as idraku shay'i ala ma huwa bihi fil waqi'. It is to grasp things as they truly are in reality. Truly, to increase me in my understanding of reality. Increase me in to know what truly is reality and what is not reality. So we have the news is given to us, and it concerns the great economic powers, the great military powers, or those particular powers which those greater powers have an interest in. So this is why you will see in the news reports about what's happening in China, what's happening in Russia, what's happening in Europe, what's happening in the United States, what's happening in India, among other places, in Pakistan and Gaza, because this is what is important for those particular people, those particular powers. There used to be a time in Islamic history as well when those on the spiritual path, or those particular from the spiritual, or we call it today Sufi orientation, they would say that one of the signs of God's grace is that He makes an individual popular, or He eternalizes the memory of an individual. That's an understanding, a belief that many people have. And it used to be something worth valuing, a claim to place value on, especially before the printing press, especially before the spread of capitalism. But after the printing press and the spread of capitalism, it's hard to discern or to utilize that as a rule to determine what is truth and what is falsehood, who's upon truth and who's upon falsehood, what person whose sincerity Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has accepted and whose sincerity has not been accepted. Because there are many different people, as we know, very popular people today. That some people will never forget. Some people will never be forgotten, but some of these people are very evil people. And so it is important for us to understand that when we have the tools to project ourselves, project our agendas, then we can create reality for other people as well. We can inspire in those people, or we can persuade those people into buying into a certain narrative. And so there are many different people, when we look at all these things happening in the world, who will believe that we are definitely, without a doubt, we're living in the last days, in the last times. Many people believe that. Many people believe that. But Allah knows best. People have been saying this for thousands of years, that the end of the world is coming. But things, when you look at them, that are happening, don't make you feel very comfortable at times, especially when you see what's happening, in particular right now, in the Muslim world. But you see, again, talk of these powers and the interests of these powers. So our concern should not be so much about whether or not these are the last days. Our concern should be about that great reality that we do know, which is, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us about in the Quran, Ya ayyuhan nas, Ya ayyuhan insanu innaka kadifun ila rabbika kadhan famulaqih. Oh man, you are toiling to your Lord, a great toiling, and you shall encounter him. You shall meet him. فَأَمَّا مَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابُهُ بِيَمِينِهِ فَسَوْفَ يُحَاسَبُ حِسَابًا يَسِيرًا. So whoever is given his record in his right hand, then that person will be reckoned with a very easy reckoning. وَأَمَّا مَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابُهُ وَرَاءَ ظَهْرِهِ فَسَوْفَ يَدْعُو ثُبُورًا وَيَصْلَى سَعِيرًا إِنَّهُ كَانَ فِي أَهْلِهِ مَسْرُورًا. But the one who will be given his book behind his back, then that person shall cry for extinction, for destruction. He will ask to be destroyed, or to be wiped out of existence. And he will, but he will enter into a fire. That person in this life was sitting joyful with his family and with his people in this life. That's the reality into the day, what we truly need to be concerned about during these times. And so what this means is that Muslims definitely need to be doing those things that will increase our iman. Because one thing that is said about the Masih, the Dajjal, the Antichrist, is that the letters Kaf Ra will be written between his eyes. يَقْرَأُهُ كُلُّ مُؤْمِنٍ كَاتِبٍ وَغَيْرُ كَاتِبٍ. That every believer will be able to read it, be he literate or illiterate. Which means that your true literacy is based upon the light of Iman. That you don't even have to know Arabic in order to be able to identify who the Antichrist is. Rather, you need to have a heart which is illuminated with Iman, with the light of Iman. So we need Iman. We need Iman. We need to do those things that will increase our Iman. But among those things that will help us increase our Iman is an increase in knowledge. As an increase in knowledge. An increase in the ability to discern truth from falsehood, from right from wrong. And that comes from study. It comes from academic rigor as well. And so throughout this Muslim history, if we go back to early Muslim history, there were two basic tendencies that developed. There was this tendency known as the tendency of Ahl Hadith, the traditionalist tendency, this tendency of the people who placed an emphasis on the authority of revealed knowledge. And then there was somewhat of a counter tendency known as Ahl Ra'yi, the rationalist tendency, which are people who didn't say that revealed knowledge is not valid or authoritative, but rather they considered reason to have some degree of authority, that it had some more authority than the traditionalists would say. And so for this reason, when we find in many of the books of polemics, be they in jurisprudence or in theology, that we find that when the scholars argue, they begin often with what we call dalil al-naqli, revealed or transmitted proof, in order to make their claim or make their argument. And then they will follow it up with what's called a dalil al-aqli, so the rational proof. So this is the revealed or the transmitted proof or evidence of my position. And this is the rational proof or evidence for my position. And so throughout our history, Muslims have not gone to an extreme in the terms of, or at least in terms of orthodoxy, that the overwhelming majority of the people were not people of extremes. They're not people who will go to the extreme of becoming hyper-rationalist people, or people who are only concerned about what is to be found written in the pages of a book. Right? There's a balance. That there was no sort of dichotomy between religion and science in our tradition. Now, there have been, of course, anti-rational, anti-scientific traditions in history. However, but what's important from this, what I'm trying to say is that we need iman, but we also need what we call tamyiz. We need to have the ability, or develop the ability to discern truth from falsehood. We need to learn to ask the right questions when we observe certain things, when we hear certain reports. We need to ask about what these sources are. We need to ask about what's the level of reliability, of the credibility of the source. That we need to ask those type of questions when we hear reports about any given thing. That Muslims as well need to understand too that Islam does not radicalize people. It's not Islam that radicalizes people, and this is why it places this emphasis on the importance of us realizing that reality is constructed largely for us. And that is to say that Muslims, if you find a Muslim who's radical, it's not because of Islam that that person is radical. It's because of things in society, things happening in the world that makes people radical. So we have to change the world if we want to get rid of radicalization. If we don't want radical people, then we have to stop doing things that create radical people. And so in preparation for the meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we come back to very simple teachings of our Prophet ﷺ, the simplistic teachings of Islam, because the Quran teaches us وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ, that I not place any difficulty for you in this religion. And what are those simplistic teachings? Pray your 5 on time. Pray your 5. Fast Ramadan. Give charity. Be charitable people. Smile in the face of your brother, your sister. Right? Be people of congeniality. Be congenial people. People who are friendly to others. That you speak good or don't speak at all. Give up those things that cause you doubt for those things that don't cause you doubt. These are prophetic teachings, simplistic teachings of Islam. Avoid doubtful matters. If you don't know something's halal or haram, avoid it. That these are the basic teachings of Islam. Be generous to your guest, to your neighbor, right? If you truly believe in Allah in the last days, we know, be good to your neighbor. Be good to your guest. Treat them good. The teachings of true humanity. And these are the things we need to be trying to recapture at this time. Because those are the things that are going to give us the right amount of light, which is necessary in order for us to know that this is falsehood and this is truth. These people are satanic people in what they call to, and those people are, alhamdulillah, on the right path. That this is what will do that for us. Being that way. Being people of goodness. Being people who are Muhammadan sallallahu alaihi wasallam in their behavior. It starts there. But it also means that we become people of intellectual rigor on top of that too. That we don't just simply accept every claim that we hear. We don't just simply repeat everything that we hear. That we question, what is the source of this claim? What's the credibility of that source? Does it make sense? Is it logical? Right? So we need both. We need here and we need this. We need both, use both this and that. Well, so with this, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will spare us from the punishment of the hereafter. But with this, inshallah, He will spare us of so many frustrations in this life. the importance of education and remember that the first word revealed to the Prophet ﷺ was Iqra. Read. Right, this is our deen, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to return us to our deen. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين نبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم أعز علينا، اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين، اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين، اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين وأذل الشرك والمشركين ودمر أعداء الدين. اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان، اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان، اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان واجعلنا من الراشدين. اللهم زدنا علما، اللهم زدنا علما، ربنا زدنا علما يا رب العالمين. اللهم إنا نسألك الجنة وما يقرب إليها من قول وعمل ونعوذ بك من النار وما يقرب إليها من قول وعمل. اللهم إنا نسألك من كل خير سأله منك محمد نبيك ونعوذ بك من كل شر استعاذك منه محمد نبيك. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وارحم محمدا وآل محمد وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت ورحمت وباركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على ملائكتك والمقربين وعلى أنبيائك والمرسلين وعلى أهل طاعتك أجمعين. اللهم اغفر لنا ولأشياخنا ولأئمتنا ولمن سبقنا في الإيمان مغفرة عظمى. اللهم إنا نسألك من كل خير سأله منك محمد نبيك ونعوذ بك من كل شر استعاذك منه محمد نبيك. ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا. اللهم اغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات ومؤمنين ومؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات واغفر لنا اللهم معهم بفضلك وإحسانك يا أرحم الراحمين. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. اللهم اغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات ومؤمنين ومؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات واغفر لنا اللهم معهم بفضلك وإحسانك يا أرحم الراحمين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وقنا عذاب النار وقنا عذاب النار. وصل اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الأخيار وسلم تسليما كثيرا. وسبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. وأقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح.